Welcome, everyone, to the Morning Drugs Podcast. I am your host, Gavin, and I'm so very grateful that you've chosen to spend the next hour or so with me. It being the first episode, it only makes sense that we chat about why you're here and why I'm here. And in discussing why we're here, I am afraid that we might be chopping the potential audience in half before we even get started. Broadly speaking, we're here to talk about mental health, but in the world of podcasting on the topic of mental health, there's an audience that I believe is not being served. What you're listening to right now is about my sixth attempt at recording this episode. The first few times, I just wasn't happy with the audio. That's a separate issue. But the last few times I recorded, I was the problem. So, to break through that barrier, I'm going to rip off the band aid and we're going to talk about the hard stuff right up front. As I just said, my motivation to record this podcast stems from an underserved group of people in the world of mental health, and there's a good reason for that. And that reason is a political reason. I myself am someone that leans more conservative, at least at a minimum. I'm someone that's right of center. And as such, I believe that I have a unique perspective when it comes to mental wellness. I'm someone that believes that mental health issues are very real. I believe that people should be open to seeking out help when it comes to their mental health issues. And I absolutely don't believe that solving issues regarding the brain is just a matter of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. However, on the flip side, I see dangerous and serious issues in the world of therapy, from overdiagnosing and overprescribing to allowing damaging ideologies to infest the world of psychiatry and psychotherapy. Because, generally speaking, conservative minded people don't like to discuss mental health, there's a real lack of alternative points of view on the topic. I aim to change that. So I'm jumping back in from the future right now. I'm in the middle of editing and realize that I did not complete the point that I was trying to make here at the start of the episode. And that is that this podcast really is intended for everyone. I know that coming from the point of view of somebody that might be a little bit more conservative than you're used to listening to, that could potentially be a turnoff. And that was what I was insinuating when I mentioned kind of the audience in half. But I really would love to have a broad audience from all walks of life. I would love to have left leaning people, liberal people, centrists, libertarians, whatever your political affiliation. This podcast is definitely for you. I just wanted to be very honest and upfront at the beginning as to where I stand so that you can make an informed decision as to whether or not you want to stick around. But I think that all of the subjects that I am going to cover in the future on this podcast are applicable to everyone. And I think it's really good to be open to listening to people from all sides of the aisle. So if you are somebody that is of a different affiliation than I am and you choose to continue to listen, I thank you for being open minded. And let's get back into the episode. That out of the way, who in the hell am I, and why should you listen to what I have to say? What my aim is with this episode is to give you the confidence in my ability to speak on the topic of mental health and everything else that goes along with it. My personal and professional experiences have given me the depth of knowledge needed to put together this podcast, so let's start at the beginning. I'll give you my TLDR of my life story, and then we can go from there. So, I was born in England and I was raised between England and New England, specifically Maine in the United States, hence the accent. This has shaded a lot of my perspectives on the world of mental health and health broadly. I have pretty strong opinions around socialized medicine versus privatized medicine. And those views are going to come in handy when we really dig into topics on this podcast. I was also raised very religious. Now, where I stand today is a lot different than how I was raised, but my religious upbringing shaped a lot of who I am today, and it will be an important component to this podcast. I should state that there is not going to be particularly a religious bent to this podcast. My religious beliefs or my belief in a higher power is much different and has evolved since my childhood and my teenage years. But the topic of religion will be discussed. but this isn't inherently going to be a religious podcast. I myself have also lived all over the United States. Also, I've lived in England. That is where I received my formal education. And I have been nomadic for over 15 years at this point, maybe closer to 20 years. And this, of course, is really going to shape and inform my views and opinions as well. I've seen how seriously they take mental health in some countries, and I've seen how big of a taboo mental health can be in other countries. And I've also seen what the different support systems that are available in these different places are like. So I will be able to bring that perspective into the topics as well. My current location is Mexico City, Mexico. That's where I'm recording from right now. And for the foreseeable future, I'll be here recording as well. So that is a very, very, very abbreviated story of my life, but I think those highlights right there will give you a taste of who I am and where some of my opinions and beliefs come from. As I said, I think that my professional experience and my personal experience, because of those, I bring a lot to the table. So we'll dig into both of those things. And I guess we can start with my mental health history. Now, I'm not excited to share my mental health history. I know a lot of people feel differently. A lot of people love to talk about nothing but their mental health issues. For me, this is a matter of I don't get to do this podcast unless I'm willing to talk about my mental health issues. I don't get to inform you on the topics if you don't understand where I'm coming from. So, I will start with my own personal diagnoses. These are official diagnoses that I've received from different psychiatrists and therapists over the years. I may or may not identify with all of these, but I have been formally diagnosed with OCPD, which is obsessive compulsive personality disorder. This is something very different to OCD. I would imagine most people listening are familiar with obsessive compulsive disorder and maybe have never heard the term obsessive compulsive personality disorder. This is something we will definitely get into on this podcast. For now, I can give you a quick breakdown of the fundamentals of OCPD. My elevator pitch for this mental health issue is that it involves perfectionism. That is a primary component of OCPD. And this perfectionism usually leads to one of two outcomes. Either you end up with somebody that is very high functioning when it comes to their professional life. They pursue perfectionism at the cost of everything else in their life. So these people usually don't have great relationships with their partners. If they're even fortunate enough to be able to get into a relationship, they usually don't have good relationships with their family members. Their friend circle can be non existent or very small. Their hobbies and interests usually get pushed to the side in the pursuit of high levels of success. The flip side of that is the same idea, somebody that has a perfectionistic mindset. However, the fear of not achieving perfection will lead to high levels of procrastination. And so instead of being very, very successful, they might be somebody that never leaves their room. Another primary component of OCPD is black and white thinking. This could be something is either good or bad, something's clean or dirty, somebody's opinion is right or wrong, and that I think is a pretty good quick summary of OCPD. Obviously, there's a lot more to it, but that will at least be able to separate it from OCD in your mind going forward. Another diagnosis, the second diagnosis would be ODD, which is oppositional defiant disorder. I think that one's a little bit more obvious, but think of somebody that has a very contrarian mindset, and that is what you're looking at with ODD. Next up, the third would be treatment resistant major depression. Fortunately for you guys, I have treatment resistant major depression. And I say fortunately for you because what that means is that I have tried a hell of a lot of treatments. There's almost no mainstream treatment out there that I have yet to try. And so I'm going to be able to give you guys a lot of insight, a lot of feedback, and talk about my personal experiences with a lot of different treatment methods. And finally, there's a sprinkling of different anxiety disorders that bubble up from time to time. Sometimes one is stronger than the other. Generalized anxiety and social anxiety, pretty much being the top two that I deal with. Now, I am somebody that really doesn't like labels. I never particularly had a problem with it until maybe the last 10 years, but I feel like there's so much abuse that goes on with these labels. And I feel like a lot of people identify primarily with their mental health issues instead of focusing on what their personality is. And this troubles me. I'm not a fan of it. So, I'm giving you my labels because they're accurate, they're appropriate, but just know that I don't think the labeling is nearly as important as the traits of the disorders themselves and how we go about treating them. I mentioned a few minutes ago that I had a religious upbringing. That religious upbringing, there were good elements to it, there were bad elements to it, and for me, there are residual effects of that I think a lot of people listening will be able to relate to. And so that's really where the religious talk will come in terms of, is religion in your life overall a positive, or is it a negative? Is it something that's necessary to be happy? Is it necessary for some but a hindrance for others? And so I will talk about this from my point of view. There will be episodes where I'll have a co-host or a guest, and we may get into that topic as well. These mental health issues that I just brought up, some of them are the results of trauma. And I think that trauma will be a very important ongoing theme when it comes to this podcast. So we will dig into my personal traumas, whether I like it or not. We will, like I said, talk to other people about their trauma. But because so much of what we are going to cover on this podcast is a result of traumatic events or traumatic time periods in people's lives, it's critical that I'm very transparent in my experiences and what I've gone through, and we don't need to dig into them right now. When it comes to trauma as it relates to mental health, there's an argument that we are going to investigate, which is the argument of nature versus nurture and chemical depression versus situational depression. And trauma is a massive part of that topic. So when it comes to nature versus nurture, what we're talking about is, and it's going to be different for each mental health issue that we cover, but is it more likely that this is something a person was born with, or is this more likely something that was developed as a result of things that people were exposed to? They don't necessarily need to be traumatic, but a lot of times they are traumatic in nature. Again, nature being, are you born with it, and nurture, is it something that you've developed? And usually this is something that develops in childhood and early teen years. And then chemical depression versus situational depression. Chemical depression being, do we believe that there's a chemical imbalance in the brain, or do we believe that it really is what's going on in your own life that's causing the depression or causing these other issues that you're experiencing? As I said, with the treatment resistant major depression, we are going to go into treatments that I've pursued, and these may include pharmacological treatments, a lot of different types of therapy, and various therapeutic treatments, things like mental health retreats, yoga, meditation, exercise, physical activity, hobbies, journaling. Maybe you've heard of biofeedback, breath work, TMS, psychedelics. If it's out there, we're going to talk about it. And I think that that's a pretty good summary that kind of catches you up to where I am in terms of like what I'm dealing with. Now, I mentioned four things. I mentioned OCPD, ODD, depression, and anxiety. Not all of those things are affecting me currently, but these are all things that I've been diagnosed with in the past, and so I have extensive experience with. And speaking of experience, I think that's a good transition into the professional side of, I guess, my story and why that's pertinent to putting together the Morning Drugs podcast that you're listening to right now. So, for over a decade, I have worked in and around mental health. I would give myself the title of mental health advocate. I've held various titles. I am not a mental health professional. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not a psychologist. But overwhelmingly, the majority of the work that I've done in the last decade has been in mental health. I have run a mental health YouTube channel. I did that for quite a long time. Right now, there's a pin in it. The channel itself is not finished, but right now, I'm choosing to start this podcast and focus more of my energies into this podcast. The reason being has a lot to do with what I talked about at the beginning, which is this underserved group of people. My YouTube channel and the videos on it, quite often I find myself holding back opinion so that first off, I don't get dinged by YouTube. They are not a fan of mental health channels. I've had a lot of issues with them over the years. And also, I wanted to attract the broadest audience possible in my feeble attempts to help people. I didn't want anybody cut out of the conversation, and so I held back a lot. And there was a lot of important topics that I steered clear of because I thought that they may be controversial. Due to recent events in my life, I am less concerned with the controversial. I'm less concerned with being controversial. I want to talk about the things that I want to talk about because I think they're important. And I think that because of the nature of the YouTube channel, I was forced to gloss over a lot of things, and I'm no longer interested in doing that. I want to be real, but I do have a lot of experience, like I said, with talking about mental health on YouTube. Now, that in and of itself does not make me an authority on any particular topic. I think that my own personal history of mental health issues makes me a lot more of an authority on the topic. But those two things went hand in hand. I have also done coaching in the world of mental health. This was primarily with people that were diagnosed with OCPD, or a lot of the work was actually done with people that were in relationships with people with OCPD, because that can be a very, very challenging thing. It can be very difficult to know somebody with OCPD, and we are going to have episodes where we talk about this. But because it can be challenging, the spouses, the parents, the children, the coworkers of people with OCPD, they themselves over time can develop mental health issues just from their being around a challenging person, especially if it's somebody like a spouse where you're spending considerable time with them, you're heavily invested in the success of the relationship. So those people over time could really get beat down. So a lot of my coaching work was with them as well. Additionally, I have a secular foundation that is at this point, this is my life's work. And so my goal is to help people that are suffering. And I don't want to bring these two worlds together. I want the work that I do with the foundation to be as broad as possible and to help as many people as possible. There is nothing inherently political about the work that I do. And I think that my opinions should remain my opinions, and I want to be able to keep them separate from my professional life. I think if you're reading between the lines, I'm concerned that if people were to actually listen to this podcast, because there's no guarantee that anybody's going to be listening to this, I don't want to have to fear getting canceled. I don't want to have to fear that the positive work I'm doing is being affected because people don't like my opinion. And that's all it is. It's an opinion. Anybody that you listen to online, any podcast that you listen to, especially in the world of mental health, because this is not a solid science. This is a lot of trial and error. The entire history of psychology is trial and error. So whatever you're listening to out there, it is an opinion. You may not like my opinion, but that shouldn't undo the good work that I'm trying to do. However, I do bring it up because it's incredibly relevant to this podcast because I have a tremendous amount of experience with working alongside therapists and doctors with the goal of helping as many people as possible. Most of the work that I've done is in the world of the disorders that I'm living with, that I'm experiencing. That doesn't mean that I haven't done the research. That doesn't mean I haven't spent the time working with people that have other disorders outside of what I'm living with. But full transparency, most of the work has been within the realm of the issues that I live with. And again, that work has given me the opportunity to work with some of the top mental health professionals in the United States, if not in the world, when it comes to very specific niche topics. So I think that that is a pretty good overview of my experience, both secularly in working in the field of mental health and also my experience in dealing with mental health issues that some of them, are ongoing, and I'm still having to rise to the challenge of those on a daily basis. The next thing I'd like to talk about is the title of the podcast, which is the Morning Drugs Podcast. Where did that come from? What does it mean? Why are we using it? So, recently, within the last 12 months, one of the treatment methods that I tried was specifically psilocybin, more, I guess, commonly known as magic mushrooms. In the therapeutic community, they don't refer to them as magic mushrooms. They refer to them by the active ingredient, psilocybin. And this was I wouldn't say it was a game changer treatment for me, but there was a lot of positive results that came out of the psilocybin treatment. It was very impactful and it was very meaningful. And so when I came up with the idea of doing this podcast, it was around that time. And the idea being that we want to start the day with something positive. And so morning drugs is a broad reference to taking in any medicine that is good for you. So we're not talking specifically, we're definitely not talking about hard drugs. We're not talking about heroin. We're not talking about fentanyl. And we're not specifically talking about pharmacological drugs as well. This is just the idea that there are medicines that are good for you and they come in a lot of different forms. And I want to start the day by talking about positive topics. I want to talk about positivity. I want to talk about all the wonderful things that we can do to change our lives and increase our mental wellness. It also occurred to me when I went to this, it was at a retreat that I did this. I went to a retreat, it was here in Mexico. What occurred to me throughout this experience was the value in altered states of consciousness. This is way too deep of a topic to cover in this premiere introductory episode, but it really opened my eyes to the idea that being closed off to these sorts of treatments is really prohibitive when it comes to opening yourself up to all of the different ways in which we can heal. That felt a little rambly, but what I'm saying is that there is a lot of value in these altered states of consciousness. I want a lot more research to be done. I want a lot more funding to go into this area. And I want a lot more people to become aware of the value in it. And so we will definitely be talking about that. It is what motivated the title of this podcast. It's very, very important to me because there's a lot of bad treatments out there that get good press, and there's a lot of good treatments that get bad press. And so that's why it's important to me that we talk about this. Prior to doing the psilocybin, maybe a year prior to doing the psilocybin, I had an experience with ketamine as well. This wasn't as life altering, this wasn't as impactful, but I could see the value there as well. In order to start driving this episode towards a reasonable resolution, I'd like to discuss what the goals of this podcast are and what it is that we plan on covering. So, for like the 100th time this episode, this podcast is going to be about mental health, broadly speaking, but it is about more than just mental health, and it kind of has to be. The brain doesn't exist in a bubble. I mean, it sort of does, but it also exists in the real world. And because of that, we're going to be looking at mental health through cultural, societal, political, scientific, anthropological, and technological lenses. Also, how does being conservative play into all of this? I mentioned at the top that I felt there was an underserved audience, and I mentioned that my leanings are a little bit more towards the conservative side. And so, how do I see this playing out? Well, first off, on the conservative end of the spectrum, and I instantly regret using that word because I know the word spectrum is not a generally favored word on the right. But in regards to that, I think that there's more than just a healthy level of skepticism that we are contending with. So there tends to be a real downplaying of mental health issues. And if you don't believe that something is real, then it's going to be pretty hard to fix it. So I understand the skepticism when it comes to mental health diagnoses. I understand the skepticism when it comes to the industry of psychotherapy. And I understand that there's been a lot of ongoing issues, especially in the mainstream media recently, so it's very understandable. But if you're skeptical of everything, then there's going to be nothing left in terms of solutions for you. Another thing that I see is people ignoring their own mental health issues over fear of the connotations. So this could be in the shape of viewing depression as a weakness. That's a very common viewpoint, or that any particular disorder somehow makes you less than. And obviously that's a terrible point of view, and it's terrible if you think of people with mental health issues then as being less than, and it's also equally terrible if you view yourself as less than because of a diagnosis that you received. An issue that I specifically deal with is not having the right type of mental health issues to get into the cool club. In the current climate, we see a lot of people that are almost excited to receive a mental health diagnosis. They think that it somehow creates community for them. There's like an easy bake community once they receive their ADHD diagnosis, or whatever it happens to be. So I have a disorder nobody's heard of. The disorder also tends to make you a bit of an asshole. So I get none of the benefits that I see everybody else getting from their mental health issues. That's fine. I shouldn't be receiving those benefits. I don't believe in those benefits, but that's another issue that we see on the right side of these topics. And then I guess we'll also cover things like brain rot. We'll cover false self-esteem, influencer culture. Another word that I really dislike, influencer, and we'll talk about all of these and their impacts on mental health as well. And so to really wrap up this episode, some of my main reasons for doing this in spite of the nervousness that I have, the fact that I don't like recording, the fact that I don't like the sound of my own voice when it comes to editing, all of these obstacles, the depression gets in the way, the anxiety gets in the way, but I have some what I think are pretty solid reasons for wanting to do this podcast. The first we've talked about, which is the lack of alternative points of view. There's no shortage of podcasts, that's for sure. I'm very aware of the number of podcasts worldwide, and that finding this is like a needle in a haystack. But if I knew somebody else was doing this, I might not be doing it. But I don't know of anybody else talking about mental health from this point of view, and so I'm willing to do this in spite of everything. Another reason that I want to create this podcast is that I'm very, very, very interested in community building. One thing that is guaranteed to help anybody that's struggling out there is knowing that you're not alone. So I want to use this podcast as a jumping off point to create a community that can help to uplift and to support people that are struggling, because as I said many times throughout this episode, the struggle is real. Mental health issues are real. And I think that working together is a lot more advantageous than trying to do things on your own. So community building again is a goal for this podcast. And then, for me as well, I think I have my own selfish reasons for doing it that involve personal growth. doing the challenge of, as I've spoken about, the challenge of recording this podcast, I think is a good challenge for me and for the issues that I face. And I also think that talking about this is like a form of therapy, essentially talking about my problems within the parameters of all of these other bigger issues that are going on in the world, and using them as a frame of reference, I think is good for me. It's beneficial, and so I'm doing this for personal growth. Now, as we go on and we record and we put out new episodes, and we're talking about all of these different topics, a few things that I think you guys should be keeping in mind. The most important thing to me, because we're going to be very solution focused on this podcast, is that the solutions that we will be discussing, no matter what it is that you're going through, none of these are intended to be, and none of these are one size fits all solutions. And some things will help and some things won't. And it's important to understand that mental health really is a lot of trial and error. It really is mostly trial and error. So if I suggest something and it piques your interest and you try it and you really give it a little bit of time, and it doesn't seem to be working for you, then it might not work for you, and that's not the end of the world. We're going to have to discuss many, 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 many solutions moving forward, and so do not become despondent. Do not lose hope. But they're all worthy of at least giving. Try it out, especially if it when I talk about it, it feels like something that might work for you. And I'd love to hear everybody's experience as well as we're going on. I will set up a way to reach out to the podcast, because I do, again, there's no way to build a community if you can't speak directly to me. So we'll figure out what that's going to look like moving forward. But that's really important to me. I did mention that there will be occasionally a co-host, and there will be guests from time to time. My co-host for some episodes, his name is Shannon. He goes by the OCPD Coach Online. He is himself a fantastic resource, and he's a great person to have a conversation with on the topic of mental health. And so Shannon will be joining me maybe every other episode. Where we're still working the bugs out on that, but I look forward to him being on the podcast, and I look forward to you guys hearing him. And if there's anybody else out there that is interested, you're listening to this and you feel like you'd love to share your story, or if you are a mental health professional and you have got a story to tell, or a an alternative point of view that you think should be shared on this podcast, I would love to have you on as well. I would enjoy nothing more than to have somebody that disagrees with me come on, and let's debate and hash things out in real time. And I really can't thank you guys enough for joining me. I don't know if there's one of you listening, or 100 or 1,000, but I'm grateful for everybody that decided to tune in. I really can't thank you enough. So I think that puts a bow on it for today. Thank you. This has been the Morning Drugs Podcast. I'm Gavin, your host, and I will see you in the next episode.